Imagine stepping outside and realizing the sun will not rise again for 4 months. No dawn, no dusk, just an infinite crushing black punctuated by a wind that cuts through every layer you own. This was not a nightmare. This was Tuesday for the men of the heroic age of polar exploration. And what kept them from destroying each other or themselves in that frozen darkness is one of the most profound and, honestly, overlooked survival stories in human history. Welcome to Fieldcraft Chronicles. Tonight, we go somewhere most people will never go, and we learn what it truly takes to hold a human mind together when the world offers nothing back. The architecture of routine. Building a wall against madness. The first weapon these men wielded against psychological collapse was not a tool or a weapon. It was a schedule. Ernest Shackleton understood, with an almost instinctive brilliance, that the human mind needs scaffolding when its environment provides none. Aboard the Endurance, locked in Antarctic ice, days were structured with almost military precision. Mealtimes, work assignments, scientific observations, evening entertainment, not because the work always needed doing, but because the structure needed to exist. Routine created the illusion of forward motion when the ship wasn't moving and the sun wasn't rising. For modern survivalists and bushcrafters, this principle translates directly. In any prolonged field scenario, especially one involving isolation or bad weather, building a daily rhythm is not a luxury. It is psychological infrastructure. The banjo. In the ice, why morale is a survival skill. Shackleton famously insisted on bringing a banjo into one of the most hostile environments on Earth, and history has largely treated this as a charming footnote. It was not. It was a calculated survival decision. Music, theatre, sing-alongs and improvised comedy nights aboard frozen ships and inside buried huts served as what psychologists would now recognize as communal emotional regulation, the group processing collective stress through shared experience. When meteorologist Leonard Hussey played that banjo on dark Antarctic evenings, he wasn't entertaining the crew. He was chemically altering their neurological state, lowering cortisol, triggering dopamine, and rebuilding the social tissue that prolonged darkness slowly erodes. Every celebration of a birthday, every mock theatrical performance, staged in a cramped hut, was an act of deliberate psychological resistance against entropy. Shared suffering as sacred bond. There is a particular kind of trust that only forms when people suffer together with no exit available. The polar expeditions created it in abundance. When every man aboard knew that his survival depended on the man sleeping 18 inches away from him, hierarchy became fluid, ego became dangerous, and genuine interdependence became the operating system of daily life. Roald Amundsen's crews were legendary for this. Men of different ranks eating together, working side by side, their shared struggle dissolving the social distances that would have separated them in civilization. This isn't sentimentality. Research on isolated and confined environments, from Antarctic stations to modern military units, consistently shows that perceived social equality during hardship accelerates trust formation and dramatically reduces interpersonal conflict. The lesson for today's preparedness community is direct and sobering. The group that survives a prolonged crisis will not be the one with the most gear. It will be the one that built the deepest human bonds before the crisis arrived. Psychological hibernation, the wisdom of deliberate withdrawal. Not every survival strategy involves action. Some of the most effective mental tools these expeditioners developed were tools of stillness. As the polar winter deepened, experienced leaders noticed that crews who attempted to maintain high social energy throughout the entire dark season burned out emotionally, leading to irritability, conflict, and breakdown. The adaptive response, documented across multiple expeditions, was what Admiral Richard Byrd later called a kind of psychological hibernation, a collective unspoken agreement to reduce social demands on one another, to allow silence, solitude, and inward focus without interpreting it as hostility or withdrawal. Men learn to be alone together. For those of us in the bushcraft and preparedness world, this is a radical and undervalued concept. Knowing when not to push, when to let a teammate retreat into themselves without pressure, is a form of emotional fieldcraft that most survival training never touches. The narrative that holds everything together, perhaps the most invisible and most powerful force keeping these teams intact, was something that required no equipment at all, a shared story. Shackleton was a genius at this. Every setback was reframed as part of an epic worth enduring. Every sacrifice was woven into a collective narrative of meaning that made suffering purposeful rather than random. When the Endurance finally sank beneath the ice, Shackleton reportedly told his men ship and stores are gone, so now we'll go home. 5 words that transformed catastrophe into a new chapter. The men who kept diaries were doing the same thing on an individual level, constructing an audience, imagining a future reader, and in doing so maintaining the sense that their experience mattered. That act of self-narration was not vanity, it was identity preservation under conditions designed to dissolve identity entirely. What the ice teaches us now. The darkness these men endured was not metaphorical. It was absolute, physical, and relentless. And yet the expeditions that succeeded did so not through superior equipment or extraordinary individual toughness, but through the deliberate, almost artistic cultivation of human connection. Routine, celebration, creative expression, shared suffering, earned trust, and the courage to tell a story worth surviving for. These were the true survival tools of the polar night. In a world increasingly defined by isolation, digital disconnection, and individual self-sufficiency, the lesson these frost-bitten, darkness-hardened men offer us is quietly revolutionary. You cannot truly prepare alone. The deepest fieldcraft is human. If this episode reached something in you, if it made you think differently about resilience, community, or what it truly means to be prepared, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Fieldcraft Chronicles for more cinematic deep dives into the history, psychology, and practical wisdom of survival. The world needs more people who understand how to endure. Help us find them.